Well, hello and welcome to this webinar on the French Business 101. Together, we're going to talk about which are the different legal structures that exist in France and how to choose which one is the appropriate version for your particular project. And I'm going to explain the taxes in simple English. Hopefully, by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to see what are the choices available and what seems suitable to you. And basically, if you're here today, it's probably because you're about to create your first business in France, or you want to look at the different options that are available before you make your choice. Maybe you already have a business such as a macro entrepreneur and you want to make a choice before moving up to something else, or you might even also be going in business with someone else. By the end of this webinar, the idea is that at least you will be understanding the basics of the French system, see the difference between a sole trader and an incorporated business. You will also see the difference between the different types of French incorporated business. We have an EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU. I will explain all of this in a moment. And you'll have a better idea of how French business taxes are working depending on which business you are going for. And you will also know the things that you have to pay attention to before you make your choice. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a few words of French vocabulary that you want to know, because when you speak to your accountant or your bank manager or a business advisor, if you don't use the right terms, actually you might misunderstand the calculation, you might misunderstand the taxes. So the words that I want you to know, and I will use several times across the presentation, there's basically two types of businesses that we have in France. We have Entreprise Individuelle, and yes, there will be a few acronyms because we're in France and that's a long word to shorten, but Entreprise Individuelle, and you will see that in France we talk about EI, the AI, the EI. Entreprise Individuelle is when you are a sole trader, you are the entrepreneur. There's no distinction between you and the business, so it's a sole trader, or in the US we might talk about sole proprietorship. And then we have une société, so une société is an incorporated business, and this time the business has its own legal entity which is independent from you, so there's a clean cut between you and the business. It's also where you cut your liability as to the debts that the business might have. So what you might have actually heard about, or you might have heard before, is the words micro-entrepreneur, auto-entrepreneur. What you want to know is that those are actually a subcategory of Entreprise Individuelle. So Entreprise Individuelle is the business type, and actually when you talk about micro-entrepreneur, auto-entrepreneur, they are the same thing, it's just the name was changed after a few years. This is what we call a regime, and a regime is the way you're going to be paying your social charges. I will explain this a little bit further. So sometimes you might think, well, you're learning French, it's normal for you to not get those words right. And actually, most of the time, French people get it wrong. And when I was an advisor to French entrepreneurs, quite often when people talk to me about their business, they might say, ma société does this and that. And actually, when you look into it, it's not an incorporated business, it's a sole trader. So when it's just a chit chat, it doesn't really matter. But actually, when we talk about legal terms or taxes like we're doing today, it's important to actually see the difference between what is a sole trader for what is an incorporated business. And then sometimes people say other things which are completely normal. For instance, you might have somebody saying, I'm a freelance, je suis un freelance, je suis un freelancer, je suis un entrepreneur, je suis un gérant, je suis un chef d'entreprise. And those are common in French, just a way of talking about the entrepreneurs, the person running the business. And those are just terms to describe the person running the business, but they're not legal terms. So whether you say I'm a freelancer, entrepreneur, gérant, chef d'entreprise, it doesn't really tell us which kind of business we have behind that. Now, the other two words that I want you to pay attention to, and that some people get wrong, and again, that's normal, is the difference between rémunération and le salaire. So, le salaire is when you are an employee. So you have a work contract with a company as an employee. You are paid, so you're called le salarié, and you pay through a pay slip. And that might have been the case for you, for instance, if you're working in your own country and you're an employee and you move to France and basically your employer doesn't want to keep you as an employee. They're quite happy to work with you if you go freelancing. In that case, don't talk about the terms employee, employer, salary. You're moving on to a freelancer, so we talk about customer, le client, And when we talk about the income that you take out of the business, we have this pretty ugly word to say, la rémunération. So there are lots of vowels in this one. La rémunération is basically the entrepreneur's income, is the income that you take out of your business. And this word is super duper important to understand, because basically in most cases, your social charges, the taxes that you're paying to yourself to go towards your pension, your health cover, the French system, is based on your business income, entrepreneur's income, la rémunération. So it's important to see that. Sometimes we say la rémunération de l'entrepreneur, la rémunération du chef d'exploitation, like the person exploiting or running the business, or we might say la rémunération du gérant. So basically, the income that you take out of the business, or we might say le revenu. So this one, I will mention it later. It's important to see, okay, that's my income I take out of my business, and later on I will show you what that income is based on the type of business that you are going to be choosing. So these are the basic words I want. The French lesson is over, you can relax. I'm going to be talking to you about a concept which I like, which I call the French business staircase, to illustrate the different types of businesses that there are in France and the fact that we're going to be going up a staircase as we develop our business. So when you start your entrepreneurial journey in France, you are down the stairs, and basically what you want to do is you want to start your freelancing activity with the simplest business structure, just to make it easier for yourself, because you're moving to France or you're having your first business and you want to have something that is super easy to create, super easy to manage and flexible. And as you learn how the French system is working, as you feel more confident with the taxes and the business and the French regime, you are going to, and you develop your business, you're going to move up to something else. If you follow me or if you follow my newsletters, you will see that very often I talk about keeping things simple. It's like keep it simple, stupid. Keep it super simple when you start, because you've got so much to cope with by just moving to a different country, that you don't want to make it harder for yourself by choosing a business which is super rigid to manage with stronger rules that you may not understand. So the idea is you're going to start at the bottom of the stairs, and as you develop, you're going to go up the stairs. And spoiler alert, you might even skip a couple of steps because they may not be appropriate for your activity, and I will explain this later on. So basically, if I look at this French business staircase, on the left hand side we have the sole traders, and earlier I was talking about Entreprise Individuelle, and in a couple of slides I will put the French word, but sole traders, Entreprise Individuelle, you are the business, there's no distinction between you and the business. And we have the two that I mentioned, micro-entrepreneur, and the second one is Entreprise Individuelle, réel simplifié. I'm going to go into each of them later on, so don't worry, we'll go into the details. And on the right hand side of the stairs, we have the incorporated business. So I was talking about les sociétés. So this time the business has its own legal entity, and we have those acronyms EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU. And again, I will explain those in detail. So as we start down the bottom of the stairs, this is a super simple business type. We're going up, it's a bit more complex to manage. We're going to a full incorporated business with stronger accountancy rules and so on. So this is just to summarize. On the left, we have the sole traders versus on the right, the incorporated business. Entreprise individuelle on the left, and I did use that little acronym EI versus société, incorporated businesses. And under the entreprise individuelle, we have micro-entrepreneur, which might refer to as ME, and entreprise individuelle, PEI, or réel simplifié. This one I will explain, is one I'm not very keen on because it's a bit complex. We will see that based on the type of business, or what we call regime, the base of taxation will change. So for instance, for a micro-entrepreneur, it's a pay-as-you-earn system, and your taxes will be based on your sales, while with a réel simplifié, your taxes will be based on your profit. And I will explain this in more details in a moment. We see on the left-hand side, Entreprise Individuelle, and on the right-hand side, we have our incorporated businesses, les sociétés. On the right-hand side, we have those type of businesses, and if I give you the detail of the acronyms, in French we say EURL, SARL. In English I tend just to say EURL and SARL. Most people understand what it is, but basically these two are similar. It's just the EURL, entreprise unipersonnelle à responsabilité, just has the one associate, while with the SARL you have two associates. And for SAS, SASU, those two are also going together, and the difference is just that SASU, you have the U for unique,
So you have just one associate. With SAS, SAS, you just have at least 2 associates. And I would say that you will see as we go along that these two, SASU, SAS, are the closest that you can have if you're looking to compare with a UK limited company, with a US LLC, or a South African PTO. Let's start with the micro-entrepreneur. So that's the first step of the staircase, and basically the micro-entrepreneur is the easiest legal structure to set up and to manage in France. This was launched in 2009, so it's been there for quite some time now, and it was the first time that France actually had a flexible business structure for entrepreneurs. Before, it was a bit more rigid to start your first activity. So this is what they call a pay-as-you-earn system, which means that you're only going to start paying some taxes and social charges when you make some sales. So if you create your business today and you don't have sales for 2 months, you just declare 0 and you pay €0, but you have to remember to make a declaration. With this regime, with the micro-entrepreneur, and sometimes people refer to it as auto-entrepreneur, it's simply that when it was launched in 2009, it was called auto-entrepreneur, and later on, the name was changed under President Hollande. All the declarations for this business type are done online, so that's pretty good because basically, as a new person in France, your French may not be up to speed, and because it's all online, you can turn on the automatic translation from Google or another app, and therefore it just makes it easier for you to declare this, and it's online. So if you happen to be traveling when you have to declare something, you can always access your account. You don't need to have an account for your regime. And yes, it's manageable with limited funds. You don't need to have a professional bank account, but I do recommend that you have a dedicated bank account, so at least you can split up the business money from your personal money, because what you cash in is not the income that you can take out, so it's best to have it separate so you have time to look at it and see how much you have to save for your taxes, look at your expenses, and then see what you can take out. So you can just have a personal bank account that you dedicate for the activity, and most of the time when we talk about it, the official term is called régime micro-social, and what that means is that you're going to be paying your social charges based on your sales. If I look at the macro-entrepreneur, what you want to know is that there's a maximum turnover that you can invoice and cash in per year, and we say HT refers to hors tax, meaning without the VAT. For service-based activities, the maximum that you can invoice and cash in for your first year in business is €77,700. If you're more buy to resell, e-commerce or shop, it is €198,000. Then you might say, wow, that's a bit restrictive. I think I might do more, or I might be slightly over. Well, the good news is that this limitation is for the first year in business, and for the first year in business, it's actually a bit more rigid. It's pro rata. So the 77,000, for instance, if I'm a programmer or I'm a marketing consultant, if I start on the 1st of Jan, I can invoice €77,700. But if I start halfway through the year, because of a silly pro rata rule, I can only invoice half of that. However, from the second year in business, you could be way above that. Nobody cares. You can actually go above that threshold, maximum threshold, for 2 consecutive years without having to come out of the macro-entrepreneur. So let's say I create my business this year, I'm a community manager, I create my business on the 1st of Jan, and I invoice, I know that the maximum is 77,000, so I might postpone an invoice to the 1st of Jan 2025 in order to stay as a macro, because I think it's good for me, a macro-entrepreneur. Let's say I invoice €77,000, it's okay, I can stay next year as a macro-entrepreneur. Then 2025, I could make €90,000 or €110,000, nobody cares. The year after again, but then after that, because it would have been 2 consecutive years above the maximum threshold, I would have to come out. If I don't do anything, they just switch me to the next regime up, which is régime réel simplifié, which I explained in a moment, or I might decide to change before that to say, okay, I've had enough of the macro-entrepreneur, I want to move to a French incorporated business, I'm going to shut it down and create the new structure. So with this one, just remember your social charges. These are the tax that you pay to a body called URSSAF. The social charges are based on the sales that you cashed in. So let's say that I decided to pay, you can pay on a monthly or quarterly basis. Let's say that this quarter, we're coming to the end of the quarter, I've invoiced €10,000, but my customers haven't paid on time, or only cashed in €6,000 that were paid to me. What is paid abroad or in France is being paid to me, €6,000. In that case, when I declare make my declaration to URSSAF, I will declare the 6,000 because I haven't cashed in the other ones. The main downside of this micro-entrepreneur business or regime is that basically you cannot deduct your running expenses. So let's say I've invoiced 10,000 euros to my customers, and actually I hired a contractor to do some work for me. It did cost me 2,000 euros. I'm going to be invoiced on 10,000 euros cashed in. I can't deduct the 2,000. I'm going to trace it in my bookkeeping. So bookkeeping, I have to log in what's coming in, what's coming out, just in case I have a control so I can show it to the tax people, but I can't deduct it. So you might say, well, that's no good. In theory, it could be no good, but actually when the government came up with the social charges rate for micro-entrepreneur, without you saying it, and I won't explain the details at this level because it's too early, but basically they do take into account an average level of running expenses which are relevant to your activity. So for profession libérale, take a certain amount, which is about 34% of your turnover. So if you look at your details and your expenses plus social charges, and you can see they represent less than 34% of your turnover for a consultant, it means that the micro-entrepreneur is a good regime. Conversely, if you still, for instance, a marketing consultant, but you subcontract a lot of work, and out of your turnover, 50% goes to contractors and expenses, because what the government considers as your expenses is 34%, in that case it wouldn't be a good match, so we'd be better off to move to something else. For those kind of calculations, I have what we call the power hour, so you can book an hour with me so we can compare what works better. But usually as a newcomer, the way it's calculated, you can't deduct your expenses, but they work to your advantage because they have taken good averages. Now, your level of social charges is going to be based on your turnover, and basically it is 21.2% if you're providing services. So when we talk about profession libérale, it's all the intellectual-based activities. So your programmer, teacher, consultant, coach, all of these are profession libérale. If you provide manual services, so you're an artisan, you're a builder, roofer, or you provide what we call commercial services, such as conciergerie, this is 21.1% of your sales. And if you have an activity where it's more buy to resell, you sell things on Etsy, or you have an e-commerce shop, or you sell on markets, or you have a shop, or you have GIS, it's 12.3% of your sales. And you're going to choose, when you register a business, you decide whether you want to pay on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So once you've made that choice, basically there's one website where you log in at the end of each month or each quarter. You say how much you've cashed in. It automatically calculates your taxes based on your activity type and the choices you've made. You have to validate to confirm that you're okay with it, and then you validate a second time to confirm that they can take the money from your bank account the following month. So now we're moving one step or a couple of steps, and we're moving to Entreprise Individuelle, or EI, and this is called exactly, so that's a real mouthful, Entreprise Individuelle, or Régime Réel Simplifié. So this one might be for you. For instance, when I mentioned that you couldn't deduct expenses and you have high costs, you might say, well, that's no good, I want to deduct my expenses. So that's the next regime where you basically, you're still a sole trader. There's no difference between yourself and the business, but this time your social charges are going to be calculated on your profit. With this type of business, there's no cap on turnover. There's stricter rules of accountancy. From that point on, you need to have an accountant that you're going to be working with in order to produce your loss and profit account, in order to complete a yearly declaration with yourself and the tax office. And with this one, we can deduct your running expenses, we can depreciate your equipment. Now, social charges, I bet that's the first thing you saw on that slide. The social charges are based on your profit, and they represent 42% of your profit. So sales minus running expenses give you your profit, and that's 42% of that. Ah, Valerie, it was 12% or 21% before, and now we're on 42%. That's no good. Just remember, we're not talking about the same basis. Micro-entrepreneur was 12 to 21% of your sales cashed in. Now this time we're talking about your profit, so we've had time to take into account or deduct all your running expenses. Now, big warning for this regime. So think of regime as a diet. Basically, it's the way you're going to be paying your charges. Big warning with this is that with this regime, from this one on, the social charges are actually paid over 2 years. Basically, when you start your activity, yourself, the body you're going to be paying your social charges to, they've got no way of knowing what will be your profit. You started, you knew, they don't know how much you're going to make. So basically, what you have to start with is something that we call appel de cotisation, and basically it's call for social charges. And usually for new activity, it's going to be about 3,000 euros, more or less, divided into 4 quarters for the year. So that's what you're going to start paying towards your contribution. However, big warning, this is a call for social charges, which means that there will be a lump sum money to be paid 1 year later, and this is called régularisation de charges sociales, so social charges regularization, and this one will be 1 year later once they actually know your profit. So basically, when you're a sole trader, Entreprise Individuelle, your calendar year is going to go to the 1st of Jan to the 31st of December, and then your accountant is going to produce your loss and profit account. Usually it takes a while, it takes them a couple of months, and in March, April, you have a declaration to file to both URSSAF and Impôt, and this is where your accountant gives a simplified version of your loss and profit account so that URSSAF knows your profit. And it's at that time that URSSAF says, okay, right, let's say you've made 10,000 euros of profit, 10,000 euros times 42%, you should have paid to me 4,200 euros, you've already paid to me 3,000 euros, therefore you owe me an extra lump sum of 1,200 euros. Now you can see where the issue is going to start to be here, is that basically even you, when you start, it's unpredictable it is going to be, so you have to remember to make sure you save money every month. Whenever you take some money out of your business, always put some on the saving account, because 1 year later, if you had a good year, you could have a huge lump sum money to pay to URSSAF. And if you've heard horror stories in France about people owing a lot of money and having to close down business, chances are the risk is more likely to be that this was this regime that people chose, because basically you need to save money, and whenever you take out money out of your business, earlier we were talking about remuneration, entrepreneur's income, la rémunération. Whenever you take some money out, just think in your head, okay, I know that whatever I'm taking out, eventually I'm going to be paying 42% of taxes. Although I'm starting to paying some now, I just make sure I save some. So if I take 1,000 euro out, I'm going to put maybe 400 euros away for the balance payment to URSSAF. So the horror stories is this regime, because people don't understand the régularisation, or it's never been explained to them. So if you've never been explained how it works, obviously it's easy to get it wrong. And this is why I said earlier that there were a couple of rotten steps. There might be a rotten step on the French staircase, and to me that's the one. I tend to recommend to expats to skip this one, because if you haven't understood how the taxes are working, if you're not used to be thorough about your bookkeeping or have some kind of projection, it's pretty tough to save enough money, and that's why you get bad surprises with a huge call of social charges to pay back. So what I would tend to recommend is, if you start with a micro entrepreneur, really boost your micro entrepreneur, explode the turnover, and then move directly to a French incorporated business, because at least at that point the French incorporated business has its own legal entity, so there's a clean cut between you and the business. If things go wrong, it doesn't go on your personal asset. So that's what I would recommend. Push your micro entrepreneur to the max, and then move to an EURL and SARL if you need to draw a regular income every single month, or you have a limited development, or go for a SAS SASU if you can afford to take a smallish salary and wait for dividends, or if you have potential for large development or large profit. Now let's talk about the EURL and the SARL. So the EURL and SARL, that's when we start to have a French incorporated business. So this is more rigid, the business has its own legal entity, but this one allows you to protect your personal asset from the business. Talking about cash and properties, just know that when you do a sole trader, your main property is always protected, but if you were to go into debts and you had savings or you had a second home, this could be taken. The risk is still fairly slow, because in France, many businesses are under micro-entrepreneur, Entreprise Individuelle, very small, if you want to really secure the properties. For this type of business, you need to have an accountant to produce your loss and profit account. You need to have a professional bank account, and this is more rigid, so we have letters of incorporation, and there's also a working capital, which means when you register your business, you have the legal papers in which you describe your activity, make sure you make it broad enough to encompass things you might do in the future, and you have a working capital. Officially, the working capital could just be €1. That doesn't look great. 1,000 euros, it could be largely enough, 1,000 euro of working capital. In terms of cost to set it up, we're talking about 1,002 euros to 1,800 euros HT, so our tax. And for the accountancy fee with an accountant, that's going to be about the same amount of money. With the SARL or EURL, so just a reminder, EURL is just one associate, so it's you on your own. SARL, you have at least an associate or you're working with your spouse, that's also possible. So the social charges for the EURL and the SARL is the régime réel simplifié, so that's the one I've just explained to you, where again we have no cap on turnover. You can deduct your running expenses, you can depreciate your equipment. If you're two people, you can have we have what we call gérants, which are the managers of the business. So you could be co-managers, you could have a main manager and a secondary manager who has less shares, and that has an impact on how you're going to be paying social charges. I won't go into this because it's too much at this stage, but just know that if you're on your own, basically, if you're on your own, your status is similar to a freelancer, which we call TNS, travailleur non salarié, or basically the Entreprise Individuelle that I talked about earlier. We are under the same regime, which means that with the EURL, you're going to be paying, again, the 42% on your income, on your rémunération. The key downside of the EURL is that basically, when you start going into French incorporated business, you're thinking, okay, hopefully I have the choice between the personal income tax and the incorporation tax, and then I'm going to be paying myself dividends. To simplify things, I would say that with the EURL and SARL, when you go into that type of business, just know that really the dividends don't really work. So basically you have, you take some income, that income is taxed at 42%, then you have the choice between income tax or incorporation tax. If it's income tax, it means basically that the profit is included or submitted to your personal income tax in order to calculate your personal income tax. Well, if you go for incorporation tax, you're going to pay the incorporation tax. The business is going to be paying the incorporation tax, which is 15% up to 42,000 euros of profit, and then you distribute the dividends. But the big drawback with the EURL and SARL is that when François Hollande was president of France, he decided that when an entrepreneur was paying themselves dividends, this was more like a top-up or like a top-up income. Therefore, he put a rule which says that basically, if you're going to be paying yourself dividends, the dividends are also going to be liable to social charges. So it's only 10%, sorry, of the working capital which isn't liable to social charges. But whatever is above 10% of your working capital, bam, we have social charges. So you can see where this is bad is because basically earlier when I was saying that your working capital could be just 1,000 euro, if you think, right, my working capital is 1,000 euro, only 10% of that I can distribute to myself as dividend without taxation. We might as well just say, basically, with the EURL or SARL, any income you take out is going to be liable to social charges at 42% unless you had a high working capital. And the way that people would do this is, for instance, they keep topping up the working capital. They might place some premises, building into the working capital, or some equipment to keep building it up. How does one choose between the two options of income tax and incorporation tax? Well, basically, for many people, if you're married or you have couple, the fact that you go for income tax, because if you have kids, that tends to reduce your personal taxation. So for many people, it's actually more interesting to go for the income tax rather than the incorporation tax. So that's a choice that we make with the accountant. Basically, an accountant or myself, when we do one-to-one meetings, we always say, okay, are you married? Is your other half employee or self-employed? How many kids do you have? So that's how we see which one would make sense. But to me, if we just simplify things to the max, EURL and SARL, just assume that whatever you're going to take out is going to be taxed pretty much at the same level as the Entreprise Individuelle, so 42% of taxes. So why would you go for this? You would go for something like this. So that's what I was saying earlier, that basically people go for this when they have a high working capital. So for instance, I can see some building companies where they have asset because they've invested into premises and got buildings and equipment, so they can put this in the working capital, which means that at least because the working capital is large, they can take advantage of the dividends. But for most people, because the working capital is large, for most people it's not the case. So the reason that the EURL or the SARL might work is actually for activities where we have a high level of expenses and a low margin. So for instance, to me, that works well for someone who has a restaurant. There's loads of equipment in the kitchen, you might keep reinvesting, you've got loads of staff, so your profit is never going to be really huge. You can keep reinvest, so you can reduce it. And for instance, same thing for event management, somebody organizing, for instance, weddings or big conferences. There's loads of expenses, and you also have loads of contractors, so you want to protect yourself just in case somebody wasn't going to pay you and you would land in trouble. So you want to have a clean cut between the business and yourself. But for those, High expenses, low margins. The EURL and SARL works well because basically the aim is to pay yourself an income, a rémunération, and it costs less money to pay yourself a regular income through an EURL than you would go through the next regime. And then it works well as well for companies when they can keep reinvesting or they can increase the working capital. So first, when you have a high profit, you can put some money back into the working capital. And again, it's for someone who wants to draw a regular income. In order to make it work, because you might say, wow, that's a bit complex. Can it actually work for anyone? This one works when you need to have that remuneration coming out every month rather than wait for dividends. And for instance, I have some example within my customers where I have some customers who have a publishing company. They make magazines and make books, and for them, they work as a couple. They have high expenses in order to run and print that magazine with different contractors, but their activity isn't going to have a huge increase in the future. They've reached a level where it's stable, it's very regular, but they need to draw in income in order to live from, because they're not pre-retired. They need to have their income, so for them it works well, and they have a SARL as a couple, SARL de famille. So they like this. The other way to optimize this is to actually make sure you bring onto the business all the expenses that are relating to it. For instance, if you have a home-based office, the business might pay yourself a rent to use the office. So for instance, my tiny office, my business could pay me a rent to use this office, which is dedicated to the business, and basically your accountant will help you to work out what is the cost that you can deduct based on what an office would cost in your area. Same thing if you're using your car for your business. Let's say I'm an estate agent and I drive around to take my customers to visit properties and I use my own car. The business could pay me mileage in order to use my car. That's usually a good one because with mileage it gives you money for the maintenance and petrol and so on. So that's a good one to take money out. And then we start to go into what we call tax optimization with the advice of your accountant, where at the end of the year, if you know you made a good year, before the year finishes, your accountant is going to say, okay, we're going to place money into pension schemes. So for instance, there's one called Loi Madelin, and because entrepreneurs have a slightly worse pension than employees, we can top it up into schemes, pension schemes, that are actually deductible. So for instance, Loi Madelin, if I'm an EURL and I opted for the income tax at source, impôt sur le revenu, that's this one, income tax, impôt sur le revenu is income tax. Basically, when I place money into that scheme, that's going to become deductible from my business, which reduces the profit, it reduces the base for taxation. And we have also something else called PER, which stands for Plan Épargne Retraite, and that's also another scheme where you can deduct money to put into pension schemes. So really, with this one, the EURL, you never do it on your own. You get an accountant. Your accountant helps you to make it work for you. Another way that many businesses are using also, whether it's for the EURL and the SARL or the next one we're going to see, is the SCI. So you might have heard about SCI, Société Civile Immobilière, and basically it's a shell that you use in order to buy or manage premises. And basically what you would do is, rather than the business buy some premises, you want to split up the business and yourself. For instance, if it's my business, I might create an SCI where I, as an individual, with my SCI, I'm going to buy some premises, and then I'm going to rent it to my business. So basically, my business is renting me some premises, and for me, it helps me to grow my asset by investing into premises. So you see a lot of that in France. You might have seen, if you drive in the countryside, you have loads of blank parking, buildings that are built in what they call the zone artisanale, the artisan area, and you've got sparkling brand new businesses with new buildings. And basically that's often what they do. For instance, builder, they personally invest into the premises and then they rent it to themselves. Accountants are pretty good at doing this. You've got like shiny large accountancy firms with brand new buildings, and basically it's often the partners investing into the premises through an SCI and then renting it to the business. So for the business, it's an expense, it reduces the taxes, and for you, it's a way to grow your asset. Finally, we're moving on to the SAS SASU. So this one is the top of the staircase, French incorporated business, and that's the one that is the closest to what you've seen in the UK Limited, American LLC, South African Pty. Initially, the rule sounds very much similar than the EURL and the SARL. You can separate business with full entity, protect your asset from the business, You need an accountant, you need to produce a loss and profit account, you need to have a dedicated bank account. The registration process is a bit heavy, it's the letters of incorporation with the working capital, and the setting up fees, as you can see, are the same as for an EURL and a SARL. Now, the difference is for your status as the manager of the business. So SASU, one person, SAS, at least two people. Initially, the SAS were designed more for high-tech startup companies, but because the other French business types are a bit heavy and complex to get money out, it became very popular because the SAS SASU is super flexible and it enables you to have both income of salary and dividends. So your status within the SAS or SASU, you are called Président. You can say Monsieur le Président or Madame le Président. You are still an entrepreneur, but your status is similar to an employee. So whenever you're going to be paying yourself, your rémunération, you are actually going to have a pay slip with a full-blown salaire. Your accountant, whenever you want to pay yourself, will write a pay slip and will transfer the money from the business to yourself. Now, if you think salary, think France, you know taxes are high in France, so that's the bad news, is that when you pay yourself, salary, just know that versus when you were an employee, when you negotiated, you used to pay attention to what was your gross salary to your net salary. The gross is when you negotiate, but then you know as an employee, the money is taken out and you get your net salary. So in France, between the gross and net, you just know there's about 20%. So if I'm thinking about my net income I want to take out of my business, I need to add 20% of employee social charges, and on top of that, I need to add the employer social charges, which is about 42% on your gross. So net plus 20% gives me my gross, plus 42% gives me my the total cost to the business of your salary. So you can see that basically that's going to be high in expenses. However, that's going to be quite expensive. However, you can decide not to pay yourself a salary. You could say, okay, well, actually I don't need, I have this business, but I'm going to be living off my savings, or I have a pension, or I have a pre-pension, or my other half is earning. Well, you could decide not to pay yourself a salary. But if you pay yourself no salary, you have no health cover. So in that case, you need to pay for a private health cover. But when you do pay yourself, there's no minimum wage, so you can decide however much you want to pay yourself. I would say most people will go at least for the SMIC, which is 18,500 net, so that at least you validate the basic health cover, basic pension. And the idea with this type of business when we're here is that basically we're going to have a mixture of a salary and dividends. So the whole idea here is you're going to be paying yourself a salary, but you're not going to take out how much you'd love, would love to have 5,000 euros per month. But in France, that's going to be super expensive. So no, so how much do I need? I just check with or if you're on, you check your expenses, you check how much you need to pay for your rent, for everything. So that you see how much you need to take out. And you cap your salary on this because it's quite expensive. And then the idea is you're going to be waiting for the end of the year until you've produced your loss and profit account, your accountant has validated it, and then you're going to be paying yourself dividends. So it's like a lump sum dividends. You place them on the saving account, and the following year you keep going, you take a salary and you top it up by dividends by just taking them out of the saving account that you've placed them in. That's how you would optimize the SASU. I've talked about taxes. I'm going to give you more numbers. I wanted to give you an idea of how much it actually costs to take a salary out of a SASU. I talked about employee social charges, the 20% on top of your net, and employer social charges are 42% on top. So if I want to take out 2,000 euros out net per month to live from, the total cost to the business per year, if I add the employee social charges, your social charges is 42,000 euros. If you want to take 3,000 euros out, that's 50,000. If you want to take 4,000 euros out, that's 64,000 euros. So that's pretty hefty, which is why you can see what I was explaining earlier, that you want to keep your salary to what is acceptable to you in order to not pay too many taxes at the end. I've added here the link to a simulation tool that I use, mycompanyinfrance.ursaf.fr, where you have the calculators and you can just you can actually check how much it would cost for your salary. So don't try all the simulators because you will scare yourself and you won't want to freelance. But have a go for the salary, for instance. So speak to me, speak to an advisor to help you see what it costs. But the idea is that you cap it, and then you cap it to what you need, and then you wait for the end. That's the strategy. keep it to a smallish salary, and wait for your dividends, which the first time would be probably paid about 12 months, because by the time your accountant does the loss and profit account and so on, it takes a little while. And live on your savings in order to not pay social charges on it. The way to optimize the SASU is like for the EURL and the SARL. Basically, you could have the SASU pay you a rent for your home-based office. Even if you use just one part of the house that you rent for this, you could charge this to the SASU. Again, if you use your car, you could use the mileage, or you could use a leasing contract for the car to be rented by the business, as long as you actually use your car for work. For instance, for me, I couldn't claim any kind of mileage or leasing contract for a car because everything is done online and never go and see customers. In that case, the tax office would say, that's a bit naughty, you can't do that. And make sure you track all your expenses, make sure you put them back in your business. So anything you might buy, stationery, business books, training, traveling for work, make sure you bring all of this. And whenever you buy some equipment, again, put them on the business. You can claim the VAT and you can depreciate the equipment. So that's quite similar for this in terms of Entreprise Individuelle, EURL, or SAS, SASU. Let's talk more. Let's talk about more taxes, as we now need to see where we come down to the dividends. So for the SAS, SASU, so for instance, to me, the SAS, SASU start to make sense more like when we reach 110, 120,000 euros of turnover per year, or if you have a partner, or if you know that you're going to be developing your business, investors to come in, or your other half has a good salary, you don't need to take much salary at all, or or you might have a micro entrepreneur and a new business as a SASU. For instance, I have a customer who's a programmer as a micro entrepreneur, and he created a SAS with a partner for a program that he's designing with a friend that he's going to be selling separately. So they're two different businesses. So when we come to the SASU, so we're going to try to come all the way down to the taxes. Basically, I said to you that for the SASU, the business is going to be paying incorporation tax, which is called impôt sur les sociétés. Sales, minus running expenses, minus your salary, minus the social charges for your salary, gives you your profit. The business is going to be paying incorporation tax, and this incorporation tax is 15% up to 42,000 euros, and above is 25%. Within my customers, we don't have above 500,000 of profit, but you never know. 15%, 25%, they did go down over the last 5 years, so that's good. The percentage went down, and the amount, also the threshold, has increased here, to which is a lower rate. The business pays the incorporation tax, and then we have our net profit. What do we do with this net profit? The shareholders are going to be having a meeting. If you're on your own, it's just you, and you decide what you want to do. Pay it as dividends. Do you want to leave it in the business? Likely to leave some in the business so you have some cash flow, but let's say you distribute some in dividends, so it's going to be distributed according to the percentage of shares that each owns. So for instance, if I say for my customer, let's say they're on 50-50 with his partner, so if they want to pay 20,000 euros of dividends, it'd be 50% for one, 50% for the other. And report à nouveau is when you say that you leave the money in, so you pay anyway just for cash flow. The business has paid the dividends, but you as an individual, again, we need more taxes. As an individual, you have to declare your income tax. Dividends, you also have to declare them to your income tax, the liable to income tax, and you have this time two options. First one is a flat tax, called flat tax in France, and it's 30%. So let's say you're going to pay yourself 10,000, just for round number, 10,000 euros of dividends is 3,000 euros of flat tax. Second option is to actually say, well, actually, I want to submit my dividends to my personal income tax. And what it works for this is that the tax office applies a rebate of 40%, and then to the remaining amount, this is added to your personal income tax, and there's also a small tax called CHD of 17.2%. So let's say, I said, because it's advantageous to me, I want to add the dividends to my income tax. Let's say it's 10,000 euros. They take the 40% off, so it's 6,000 euros. Out of that 6,000 euros, there'll be 70.2% of CHG, and the rest will be added to my income tax. Now, again, how do you choose between those two of you? Well, basically, again, it's a question of what does your family looks like. For instance, if I'm married, I have 3 kids, very likely that going for the second option is going to be good for me, because in France, kids reduce significantly your income tax. Conversely, if I'm single, I know I'm going to be paying high taxes, so I would go for the flat tax. Or if I'm married and my other half has a good salary and we're already at a high taxation rate, I would go for a flat tax in order to just get rid of the tax. It's paid, done and dusted. Again, those kind of choices,
they're done with your accountant. So when you have a meeting with an accountant to talk about your business setup, based on your personal situation, based on your turnover projection, on your projected expenses, and your family household composition, the accountant would say, okay, I would suggest we go for income tax and corporation tax. I would suggest we go for the dividends to the flat tax or to the income tax, and that's how it's chosen for you. You look at the basics. Whenever you want to start a project, you might say, okay, I get a grasp of how it's working. Some of them might seem way too complicated for now, and you come back to it later. But the key thing is, whatever your activity is, you want to try to put together an idea of how much you think you might be making and how much do you think the expenses are going to be representing. And also for my customers, when it's more advanced, so for instance, for someone with a more complex activity, we also look at how much do they need to take out. When do they need to take money? Can they afford to wait? Does it need to come out now? And that's how we choose. Let's recap the social charges for the different business types. So basically, we're going to be looking at what are your social charges calculated on, which kind of percentage are we looking at, and where is the best fit. And we're looking at micro-entrepreneur, Entreprise Individuelle, EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU. For the micro-entrepreneur, social charges are calculated on your sales, on your cashed-in sales. The percentage is 2.3% for trade, buy-to-resell, shop, restaurant, e-commerce. For profession libérale, it's 21.1%. For manual services, it's 21.2% of your sales. The best fit is for someone who has low expenses. So for instance, if I work from home like me, I'm working on a computer, don't need to produce anything, got no rental cost, there's just loads of software, so that would be a good match. Or someone who's starting a new activity. If I'm starting a brand new activity, I've landed in France, I've trained as a coach, and I'm launching my activity, that would be enough to start as a micro-entrepreneur because I'm building it from scratch. Entreprise individuelle. So this time the social charges are based on the profits. We're talking about 42% of social charges on profits. So yeah, I'm not talking about the delay in time. I just rather count that number, the whole amount now, so I see how much to expect. And basically, this works well for activities where we have high expenses, either because I've got loads of things that I need to work. For instance, let's say I'm a builder and I need to buy some raw materials for my customers, or I might need to have an employee. Again, high expenses. EURL and SARL. So for this one, the base for calculation, I'm going to assume you have a lowish working capital. Is basically your remuneration plus your profit, if you choose to opt for the income tax, profit liable to income tax, impôt sur le revenu. And it's basically 42% of your profit, unless you have a high working capital. And this works well when you have high level expenses. You need to draw regular income. So for instance, all my wedding planners, event management, publishing companies, even restaurants, that's a good one. And the last one is the SAS SASU. So the base for your social charges is your salary. The cost on the salary is about 70% of the net amount. So when I take the net plus employers plus employees, and the best fit is when you can afford to actually take a lowish salary, when you can afford to wait for dividends, and I would say when your turnover is at least 120,000 euros. Someone who doesn't need to take a salary, 80,000 would be enough. But when you saw earlier on, I think, I can't remember how much it was, but I think when it was 4,000 euros of salary per month, I think the total cost was about 60,000. Let's say 60,000. On top of that, I need to add my running expenses, it might be 70,000. Basically, I'm not going to be earning any kind of dividends until I've made at least 80,000 euros. So if I want to take that much salary. But someone who doesn't need to take anything at all, that will work before. How do you decide between all of these? So as you can see, basically, micro-entrepreneur, I'm a big fan. Entreprise individuelle réelle, not a big fan. EURL SARL can make sense for activities with high expenses. Make sure you got a good accountant, that you keep in touch with your accountant to see how to optimize your profit. And SAS SASU for activities with high profit. Now, in terms of making your choice, here are the criteria that you're going to be looking at: the number of people, the development stage, and the experience. So for a micro-entrepreneur, if you're on your own, that works great. Development stage, I'm saying you're starting a new activity, you're developing it. In terms of experience, I mean experience of running a French business, beginner, that would work. Entreprise individuelle, so would be a solo, we talk about solopreneur, somebody working on their own, or someone with contractors.
someone starting or developing their activity, and I would say intermediate in terms of experience, because you need to be good with your bookkeeping. You need to have the patience to actually look into your numbers, track your expenses, save money. So you need to be kind of organized. EURL and SARL, one person with associate, maybe someone with employees, maybe someone working with contractors, and it's more a developing stage. It's a bit more advanced in terms of experience, because again, you need to be looking at your numbers, you need to be working with your accountants. And the SAS SASU, one or at least two associate, somebody who might have employees, somebody who might have a contractors, developing stage, and more advanced. So that's how I would say, basically, you're coming to France, down the stairs, micro entrepreneur, you develop your activity, and then you might move up to EURL, SARL, or SAS SASU. To finish, we're going to be talking about the registration process. In France, all business registrations on central hub called procedure.inpi.fr. That's where you register all businesses, whether you're a sole trader, whether you have an incorporated business. This is the platform that will be used either by you, either by the person helping you, or your accountant. Timescale to get what we call the SIRET number. So SIRET number is your official business number. It's a 15-digit number that you're going to be using to show that you're legit. For micro-entrepreneur, entreprise individuelle, I would say 5 to 7 days. If you're providing services, profession libérale, 1 to 3 days, usually we get it done. When it's manual activities, with chambre de métier, so artisan, that can take much longer, but we say 1 to 7 on average. And for an EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, because the process in itself is a bit more complex and we need legal documents. What is needed to register your micro-entrepreneur or entreprise individuelle is a French address, so you need to be in France. Passport or business visa if you need one, and so you might need some extra documents. For instance, if you are an artisan, or if you're artisan, so that's chambre de métier, or if you buy to resell commerce, for those we need quite a few attestations to prove that you are allowed to use the address, or the landlord allows you. If you're married, that your spouse is aware that you start a business. There's a few more documents to be needed. And for the EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU, well, this time, again, we need an address or a PO box, we need the letters of incorporation, we need the working capital with attestation from the bank, which is why it takes 2 to 3 weeks, because you're going back and forth from the accountant or bank to collect those documents. So that was the time scale in order to register your business. Now, as you can see, this is a cover. So if you want to talk about your particular situation, you can book a power hour with me. That's where we do an hour consultation, where we answer all your questions surrounding your business. We look at your level expenses and so on to decide which one seems best according to your personal situation. You can also look at my macro entrepreneur entreprise individuelle registration services, where I take over that process of creating the account with INPI, asking you for the documents or giving you templates to use, so we prepare the attestations needed. I handle it with INPI until you get your official INSEE attestation and SIRET number. And if you need help because you're more into an EURL, SARL, SAS, SASU, and you want to talk about the nitty-gritty, I introduce my customers to an English-speaking accountant, so you can send me an email with a bit more description, and I will introduce you to an accountant speaking in English, clear enough with the expenses, so you can talk it through further.